The air was crisp when I stepped out of the Uber, suitcase rolling behind me as I walked up the familiar driveway. Chris had been one of my closest friends since college, and with a rare free weekend, he'd invited me over for a couple of days. I hadn't been here in years, but the place looked the same: white porch railing, the faint smell of pine from the trees lining the yard, and that warm yellow glow spilling from the front windows. He greeted me at the door with his usual grin, pulling me into a quick hug before stepping aside to let me in. The house was buzzing with a cozy hum, some indie playlist drifting from the living room, the scent of something savory from the kitchen. "Dinner's almost ready," Chris said as I set my bag down. "You're just in time." I was halfway out of my jacket when a deeper voice called from behind me. "Chris, you didn't tell me you had company." I turned to see a man leaning casually against the doorframe, broad shoulders filling out a worn grey t-shirt, dark hair a little messy, like he'd just run a hand through it. His eyes, a shade too intense to ignore, seemed to take me in with one long glance before settling into an easy smile. "This is my brother, Jordan," Chris said. "He's staying here for a while." We shook hands, and I noticed the firm pressure of his grip, the way his gaze didn't drop away immediately. There was something assessing in it, a hint of mischief behind the politeness. I told myself I was imagining it. Dinner was comfortable, the three of us trading stories and teasing Chris about his college cooking disasters. Jordan chimed in often, sometimes directing a comment at me with just enough warmth to feel personal. His foot brushed mine under the table once, not hard enough to be obvious, just enough to make me aware of every movement after that. Afterward, we lounged in the living room with mugs of tea. Chris had claimed the armchair, already half reclined, eyes heavy. Jordan sat on the couch beside me, close enough that our knees almost touched. I caught the faint scent of his cologne, something subtle and woodsy that lingered when he shifted. "I've got an early shift tomorrow," Chris mumbled, setting down his cup. "Don't stay up too late, you two." We both said goodnight, and soon it was just me and Jordan in the soft glow of the lamp. He didn't say anything at first, just picked up his mug and took a slow sip, his eyes fixed on the muted TV screen like he wasn't watching it at all. "So," he said finally, turning toward me, "you and Chris go way back, huh?" I nodded. "First year of college. We've been through a lot together." "I can tell," he said, his voice carrying that same relaxed tone, though his eyes stayed locked on mine. "He talks about you a lot." The conversation drifted easily: movies, travel, the kind of half-serious talk people fall into late at night. But there was a charge under it all, something neither of us acknowledged. Every time he leaned forward to make a point, his shoulder brushed mine, and every time I laughed, he watched me just a little too long. When I finally stood to head to the guest room, Jordan rose too. "I'll walk you," he said simply. We paused in the hallway outside the door. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the fridge in the kitchen. He leaned one shoulder against the wall, eyes soft but focused. "Glad you came to visit," he said, his tone low enough that it felt meant for me alone. "Yeah," I managed, my voice not as steady as I'd hoped. "Me too." His hand came up, slow and casual, brushing the side of my arm like it could have been an accident, but it lingered a heartbeat longer than it needed to. For a split second, it felt like he might say something else, but instead he just gave me a small, knowing smile and stepped back. "Sleep well, Ethan," he said, and then he was gone down the hall, leaving me standing in the doorway with the faint scent of him still in the air and a thrum in my chest I couldn't shake. I closed the door softly, leaning against it for a moment before moving to the bed. I told myself it was nothing, that I was reading into a harmless exchange. But when I lay down, the warmth of his hand on my arm replayed in my mind again and again, pulling me deeper into thoughts I shouldn't have been entertaining, not here, not in his brother's house. The glow from the hallway nightlight spilled in under the crack of the door, just enough to outline the room in faint shadows. I had been lying there for over an hour, shifting from one side to the other, staring at the ceiling. My body was tired, but my mind kept replaying the way Jordan's fingers had lingered on my arm, the way his gaze had pinned me without needing words. I rolled over, closing my eyes, willing myself to sleep. That's when I heard it, a soft creak from the hallway. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming closer. My heart picked up. The door opened just enough for a sliver of light to fall across the room, and Jordan's voice came through, low and calm. "Hey, you still awake?" I swallowed before answering. "Yeah." He stepped inside, the door clicking softly shut behind him. He was barefoot, wearing a plain white t-shirt and dark lounge pants, his hair slightly mussed like he'd been lying down too. He didn't ask if he could sit, he just did, lowering himself to the edge of the bed. "Couldn't sleep," he said, glancing toward the window before looking back at me. Mind some company? I shook my head. Not at all. We sat in the dim silence for a moment before he said, Chris told me you've been single for a while. His tone wasn't probing, just curious. Yeah, I admitted, kind of taking a break from everything. Jordan's mouth curved into the faintest smile. Sometimes a break is just what you need. Other times, it's just avoiding what you really want. Something about the way he said it sent a flicker of heat down my spine. He reached over to the nightstand, picked up my phone, and without unlocking it, turned the screen toward me. See this, he said, pointing at the background photo, a snapshot of me laughing with a group of friends. That's a guy who knows how to live. You've got this energy. I noticed it the second you walked in tonight. I didn't know what to say, so I let out a quiet laugh, shaking my head. You really know how to make a person self-conscious. Not self-conscious, he corrected, leaning in slightly, his voice dropping lower. Aware. The space between us felt tighter now, like the air itself had shifted. He asked about my travels, my work, the kind of late-night conversation that felt too intimate for the time we'd actually known each other. The more we talked, the less I noticed how close we'd gotten, until our knees brushed under the blanket draped over my lap. Neither of us moved away. He pulled out his phone at one point to show me a song he thought I'd like. When he leaned in to let me hear it, his shoulder pressed into mine, warm and solid. The faint scent of cedar and something darker reached me again, and I found myself breathing a little slower, caught in the nearness. You know, he said quietly, eyes on the screen, I've been wondering something since dinner. What's that? I asked, my voice softer now. He looked at me then, holding my gaze like it was a challenge. If you'd notice, if I looked at you a certain way. The silence that followed was heavy, charged. My chest felt tight, my pulse loud in my ears. I noticed, I said finally. His lips twitched into a half-smile, like he'd gotten the answer he wanted. But instead of pushing, he leaned back a little, letting the tension stretch between us without snapping. We sat like that for a while, the room quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs. Then he stood, slow and deliberate. Get some rest, Ethan, he said, heading toward the door. Just before stepping out, he glanced over his shoulder, the dim light catching in his eyes. Tomorrow, maybe we talk about what we're both thinking. The door closed behind him, leaving me alone again, but the space felt different now. My heartbeat wouldn't settle. The scent of him, the weight of his words, the look in his eyes, they all clung to me like a second skin. I lay back, staring at the ceiling, knowing there was no way I'd sleep now, not with tomorrow hanging in the air like that. The morning light slipped through the blinds in thin gold lines, warming the edge of the bed. I had drifted off only briefly, waking at every sound in the house, half expecting to hear Jordan's footsteps again. But the only noise came from downstairs, Chris moving around in the kitchen. By the time I made it down, he was already grabbing his jacket. Heading out to pick up a few things before lunch, he said, holding his keys. Jordan's still upstairs. Make yourself at home. He was out the door before I could answer. The house felt different without him, quieter, like the air was waiting for something. I poured a glass of water and leaned against the counter, trying to decide if I should shower, read, or just pack up early and avoid whatever was coming. The sound of footsteps on the stairs made the decision for me. Jordan appeared, hair damp from a shower, wearing a fitted black t-shirt and sweatpants. He didn't look surprised to see me. If anything, he looked like he'd been expecting it. Morning, he said, his voice still rough from sleep. Morning, I replied, my throat a little dry. He crossed the kitchen, poured his own glass of water, and leaned on the counter opposite me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The hum of the fridge filled the silence until he broke it. Chris gone? I nodded. Yeah. Just us. His eyes stayed on mine for a beat too long before he pushed off the counter and stepped closer. I was thinking about last night, he said quietly. My pulse picked up. Were you? He smirked faintly. I think you were too. There was no pretense now, no subtlety. The way he looked at me was direct, his body language clear. He closed the gap between us, stopping just close enough for the heat from his skin to reach me. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with the dangerous pull of wanting something I shouldn't. You know Chris trusts me, I said, my voice low. And you trust him, he countered, but that doesn't change what's here. His hand lifted, fingers brushing my jaw. The contact was light but deliberate, tilting my head just enough that I met his eyes again. It was the pause before a storm, The moment where you know you can still step back, but every instinct in your body tells you to stay. I didn't move. His thumb traced the edge of my chin, and then he leaned in, the scent of cedarwood and something darker filling the space between us. When his lips touched mine, it was slow, testing. I should have pulled away. I didn't. The kiss deepened, and before I could think, my hands were on his chest, feeling the warmth of him through the thin fabric. He guided me backward until my hips hit the counter, his body slotting into mine with a certainty that made my head spin. There was no rush, just a steady, deliberate pace, his mouth finding mine again and again, his hands settling at my waist like they belonged there. Every thought of Chris, of the line we were crossing, was pushed to the edges of my mind, blurred by the intensity of the moment. When it finally broke, it wasn't with words but with a breath we both needed to take. He stepped back just slightly, his hand still resting on my side. "We can't," I started, but the sentence trailed off, unconvincing even to my own ears. "I know," he said, his voice softer now. "But we did." We stood there, the reality settling in. There was no undoing it. Whatever had been simmering between us since the moment we met had just boiled over, and now it would linger, whether we wanted it to or not. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway snapped us both back. Jordan stepped away, running a hand through his hair as if it could erase what had just happened. I grabbed my glass from the counter, holding it like a prop, my heartbeat still too fast. Chris's voice called from the front door. "Hey, I'm back." Jordan gave me one last look, something between a warning and a promise, before walking toward the stairs. I stood there, my hands tight around the glass, the weight of what we'd done pressing against my ribs. When Chris walked into the kitchen, smiling like nothing had changed, I forced a smile back. But inside, the air between me and his brother was still thick, and I knew it wasn't going to fade anytime soon.